Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I am excited to be speaking with Stevie Dawn Carter. And let me tell you about Stevie. She is a seasoned entrepreneur and nationally acclaimed speaker, boasting a remarkable track record as a 5-time business owner and best-selling author. With 2 decades of dedicated experience, Stevie Dawn has been trailblazing, easy for me to say this morning, trailblazing in guided individuals and organizations towards success through practical strategies in emotional intelligence, communication, and leadership. Armed with a master's degree in sociology and a doctorate in leadership, Stevie Dawn seamlessly merges academic experience with real-world experience in corporate, government, and non-profit sectors. Her unique approach blends research-backed insights and hands-on tactics, ensuring the accessibility of her training to diverse audiences. Currently, at the helm of Empathix, she leads us as CEO, driving the company's mission to foster emotionally intelligent organizations through cutting-edge corporate training. Cultivating emotional intelligence and empathy is going to be our theme today. And we were discussing before this that she and I, that's our special spot, sweet spot. So I'm so excited to be sharing this time with Stevie Dawn. Please welcome Stevie to my audience, or to my stage, virtual.
Well, thank you so much for having me today and for us having this conversation. I didn't realize you were in Roswell, Georgia. I lived part of my life in Rome, Georgia.
Yes.
I am a Georgia girl, and so love that.
I know, that's so many coincidences between the two of us.
I know, so many today. I love it.
Well, we always start with a very easy question to kick things off before we get into the meat of things, and that is to tell everybody, where do you live now?
Where do I live now? That is an easy question. I am in Mansfield, Texas, which is just a little south of Fort Worth.
Yeah, been to Fort Worth several times. I love Fort Worth.
Yeah, it's a great town.
So it may seem like a simple question, maybe one that we think everybody knows the answer to, but I'd like for you just to talk to us a little bit about what exactly is emotional intelligence, and why is it so important to us, especially those that are working in a corporate environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, emotional intelligence is the ability to do 2 things. Number 1, be able to manage your own emotions in an effective way. I don't believe that we should turn them off. I don't believe we should leave them at the door, which is what people told me many, many years when I first started working. I believe we have to take our whole human experience into work, and that means our emotions come with us. But I do think you can learn how to manage them effectively so that they're not getting in the way of the work, in the way of the relationships, and in the way of leadership. So that's number 1, managing yourself. The second part of emotional intelligence for me is using emotional intelligence to correctly interpret what other people are saying. I think sometimes we hear things through an emotional filter that we shouldn't, that wasn't existent for the person delivering the message. And so having more emotional intelligence allows you to see that, allows you to understand that, to take that step back and really listen to people for the words that they are using and the intention behind their words versus the emotions we may be feeling on the day or the emotions that we think they are feeling in that moment. And so for me, it's those two things, managing ourselves and listening or interpreting messages more correctly.
And I think that's really important. And I just wanted to kind of stay there for a second because I work with the youth as well. And, COVID had a lot of things that were not great and a lot of things that were good. But one of the maybe not great things that happened was that the interpersonal skills that are so important for us to do just what you were talking about, to be able to recognize and understand what that filtering is missing in a lot of kids. And so, as you were saying, there's so often they'll take the words that you said, not as you meant them.
Mhm.
And especially, I teach how to speak and how to be energetic and all those things, but also the tone that you use is so very important. And I think all those things, when you combine them with the emotion, can be misrepresented so often. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's so true. And it's so important because communication is the number one thing we do all day, every day. I don't care if you work from home. I don't care if you work for a big company or a small company. At some point in time, you're communicating with another individual, whether that be via email or video conference or live and in person. Communication is so important. And I think what happens so often is we get lost in our own brain in a conversation. And therefore, the words that somebody else is saying to us, we're only hearing so much, right? We don't actually hear every word that they say. And we interpret it through what we think they mean versus really thinking about what if we were to put no assumptions and no judgments on anybody? And what if we just listened to the words and took them at straight face value meaning? And people say, well, that's really naive, right? Because humans aren't like that. Somebody can tell you, oh, you look great today, but they're doing it in a way that is insincere. And the truth is that, yes, that is the case. We need to be able to read between the lines. We need to be able to understand. But every human is so different and so unique that our assumption that just because of their tone, it means they feel one way, that's putting a lot of assumptions on a human we may have just met. And so I say, what is the wrong with taking people at their word? What is actually bad about just going with, they said it was great, so I'm going to believe them. Or they said they didn't like it, I'm going to believe that too. Or they said, this wasn't great, but it's not a big deal, we'll handle it coming up. Cool, then it's not a big deal. But that's not how our brain works. Our brain wants to put all this extra emotion and assumption in it. And that's where I think we start to degrade relationships because we're not actually letting them say what they want to say. We're hearing what we think they were saying. And that's not the same thing.
Yeah. And, it also is tied to trust, which is, a big piece of what we're going to talk about, empathy and emotional intelligence. There's a lack of trust too. And that impacts what we hear.
It does. It's such a good point. If there is no trust in the relationship, the level of listening deteriorates by 75%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if there's no trust, 75%, which I think we all understand instinctively. Like, I think we know that if we don't trust, like if I don't trust Susan, I know I'm not listening to Susan. Like, I think we all know that. But I think where that becomes really important is new relationships.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget that when we've just met somebody, that trust isn't there yet. We've got to establish trust, and empathy is one of the ways that we can establish trust. But if we haven't established that trust yet, they're only hearing maybe 25% of what we're saying. So we need to be thoughtful for that, especially people who deal with new people every day. So like when I work with frontline staff at customer facing businesses, right? So call centers, I've worked with some storage units, people who all they do is meet new people every day. Well, you have to understand there's no trust there. So it's no wonder that you told them the hours, but then they come back 2 days later saying, well, you didn't tell me the hours. You did, but they didn't trust you. So they didn't hear it. And that's not really your fault. And that's not really their fault. That just is. And I think some acceptance of that would help all of us get over these hurdles a little bit easier. Just accepting that trust just isn't a given. It takes some time. And while we're building trust, there might be some miscommunication.
Yeah, so very true. So can you talk too much about empathy?
I can't. I love talking about empathy. I think that I will say that I often feel empathy is done wrong. So feel free to fight me on this, as somebody who does a lot of empathy work yourself. I think that sometimes in a corporate setting, we can use so much empathy that we become friends instead of friendly. And I think sometimes that deteriorates leadership, that deteriorates authority, and that deteriorates work environment. So I often will say that people can have too much empathy. And what I really mean is not that you can ever have too much empathy. I don't really think that. What I think is we can use the wrong styles of empathy in the wrong situations. And then that kind of lessens the impact in some way, shape, or form, right? So if we look at empathy as having like 3 levels, right? Level 3, deep level empathy, that's friends, that's family, that's I'm in this with you and we're going to solve this battle together. Right? Like, and that's a great thing. And to have that with people builds trust and camaraderie. But at the same time, at a work environment, that's really deep. And that may not be necessary to get the job done. That may create too deep a relationship for it to be professional. And I do think that we have to think about that. And I do see some places where people are using too much empathy, too much of that deep empathy, right? In the workspace that can be difficult. Level 2 empathy is more of the, I've been where you've been. I've walked a mile in your shoes. I feel that. Again, I think that's okay. That's great. Makes people feel wonderful, makes people trust people. But again, for example, if I've gone through a messy divorce and you're going through a messy divorce, and so we talk about our messy divorce together because I'm empathizing with you. You now have a lot of personal information about me that I'm not sure you should have in the workplace. And there's a level there that I think we have to think about as leaders. Coworkers, maybe just fine, but leadership may need to think about how much of that level of empathy we really give. And so what I try and help people with is let's do level 1 empathy. Level 1 empathy is cognitive empathy. It says, I see you, I hear you. I see that you're feeling something. I hear that you're feeling something. I may be sorry you're going through that, but I'm not sorry. It's not my fault. And I am not going to necessarily share with you my own experience. What you really need is just to know I'm hearing your experience. And that's enough. And I think sometimes that line gets missed and people go into, well, you told me about your story, so let me tell you about mine. And there's just a lot that I think can go wrong with that. So I do think there can be a thing as too much empathy, but really what I mean is too much of the wrong empathy in the wrong situation, if that makes sense.
Well, and a lot of times that person just needs to talk to somebody and have somebody to listen, actively listen to them. And so it doesn't mean for you to talk. It really doesn't.
And that's such a great point, right? How many times do people think, right? Like I always say empathy is listening, empathy is not talking, but
Mhm.
so many people think, but in order for me to truly listen, I need to contribute to the conversation, but that isn't actually what's required. We're just very much in a society, especially within the United States, where we feel the need to speak and to make our voice heard. And that's okay, but it just creates some of that. Sometimes people just need you to listen. They don't need you to give them advice. They don't need you to give them an opinion. They just need you to listen. And that's the empathy I wish we were teaching people. And that's the empathy that I think changes things in culture.
Well, and if you do need to talk, you can just repeat back something they said to show
Exactly.
understanding and that
Just
you
to show
heard it.
that. That's it. Just repeat back your own words. That's all you got to do. Yeah, but it's so funny because I think, you talked about the pandemic. So I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations. And during the pandemic, what we found is case managers got way too attached to
Mm.
clients, right? Some of those boundaries and some of those boundaries between leaders and employees, because we're all in this weird trauma space where we're just trauma bonding. And so now, years later, leaders are trying to separate again and put in more boundaries and all of that. And that's really hard once you've lost it. So I always tell when I teach a leadership class, I always say, we have to start by putting in those boundaries. And that can be hard, especially if you're somebody who maybe was promoted. So yesterday you were her work wife.
Coworker.
Today you're her boss. And that's hard, but we have to have those separations. And empathy is one line of separation.
Yeah, very good. So what makes someone a stronger empathetic leader? As you said, especially let's talk about somebody that's just moved into leadership, just promoted. How important is it that there is some guidance and instruction, training for that person? I had a lot of years in leadership, and that wasn't often touched on ever in any leadership class that I went to.
Yeah. No, I think you're so right. I encountered the same thing when I first became a leader. If there was training, all of it was usually on how to give feedback and how to discipline people, which isn't the day to day, hopefully. The day to day is a lot more empathy and communication. For me, when I am looking at new leaders, one of the things I really try and focus on with them is just this idea of how do you go into conversations, meetings, and just make sure other people are talking more than you? How do you make sure that you're just allowing people to voice so that you can then think and process, right? One of the number one skills of a leader is being able to think. And that's the number one thing we don't teach because we just kind of assume people can do it. But what I do know is while you're talking, you're not thinking. So we need to teach our leaders to be able to go in those first couple of, there's a great book, right? The first 90 days. Those first couple of months that you're in that leadership role and really take on listening to people, learning who they are, learning what their jobs actually entail, not what you think their jobs are, right? Because those are two different things. Learning about how they work, how they communicate. Because the more you understand about your team, the better a leader you can be, because you can adapt to the people rather than making them adapt to you, which is never going to be as successful. So I do think we need to cover empathy, but I think we also need to cover listening and taking in information and giving time to think.
Very, very true. So you said that in the very beginning that you were a speaker. We talked about that in your bio. How did you get into speaking from your life in corporate?
Yeah. That's a great question. Right out of high school, I went into corporate work and I did that for decades. But then in my 30s, I decided to go back to school and become a college professor. And so
Wow.
I was a college professor, which is what kind of showed me how much I love teaching, number one, but I had always kind of taught, like even in corporate
Yeah, me
jobs,
too.
when they need somebody to train the new person, it was always me. So
Mm,
I've been a teacher my whole life, whether that was the job title or not. But in being in front of the college students every day, I learned that's what I really enjoy. I really love
mhm,
teaching large groups. I love kind of being on that stage. I'm a performer at heart. I was a dancer for
mm,
years and years, still am. And so performance is definitely something in me. So the college professorship is kind of where I got the idea. And then as kind of hitting a burnout stage of college and I needed a break, my husband was actually the one who said, well, I feel like you're really good in front of the students. Why couldn't you do that same thing and do corporate training? And so that's kind of where we started our company. And in doing corporate training, really found that I have a talent for getting up in front of large groups because that doesn't bother me, whereas it bothers a lot of people. So that's kind of how I built that side of my business. Is just really from being a college professor and then kind of using that as an idea of stage and speaking and then parlaying that into something else, which is
mm.
funny because now 10 years into my business, I'm back teaching in the college classroom again as an adjunct, which is kind
Oh
of
my
interesting
goodness.
for me. So like all full circle, like I stepped away from it to go do this other stuff and then I started to miss it. And so now I'm back teaching in the college classroom 2 days a week. So I love that.
That's fun. It's so fun.
Yeah, it is. It's super fun.
All
Yeah.
right. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to ask about the sharks behind you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, as I said, I was a dancer. I am a dancer for a large part of my life. And there was a period of my life where that was my career. And so that was everything I was doing. And I reached a point where it just wasn't going well. I wasn't doing as well. I was competitive, but I wasn't winning. So nobody likes not winning. And so I kind of decided maybe I should call it quits. Maybe it wasn't for me anymore. I called my mom because that's what I do when I'm down. I call my mom. She's my biggest cheerleader, still is to this day. She'll probably watch this podcast and cheer me on. And she was like, I don't, what do they have that, what do those other people have that you don't have? And of course I could list 50 things. And she was like, I don't think that's it. She goes, I think you're trying to prove something. And I don't think they are. I think they're just having fun. And you've kind of lost that.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me. That really hit me. And then she said, just out of left field, no explanation given, she said, I think you just need to be the shark. Sharks own their ocean. They're not proving anything to anybody. I've always been terrified of sharks. I don't know why she thought that was a good idea in that moment, but she said it. And to this day, she can't tell you why she said it. It was just a thing that just came in her brain. And so she said it. Probably she had it on the background, saw sharks swim across TV. I don't know. But it stuck with me, even though I'm terrified of sharks, or I was terrified of sharks. So it stuck with me. And I went the next weekend to a dance competition, planning that that was gonna be the end, right? I was gonna do this one last gig that I had on my calendar, and I was calling it quits. And I won. And then I won the next 14 in a row, and I retired undefeated. And so it was really crazy to me because people ask, like, what did you do different? I did nothing different. I didn't take more classes. I didn't all of a sudden lose 50 pounds. It was all in here. It was all
Mm-hmm.
mindset. And it was that phrase, be the shark. And so I decided to let that phrase lead my life. And I got over my fear of sharks. I've went swimming with sharks. I've even gone, if I lift the screen a little bit, I've even gone cage diving with sharks. I got to see them
Oh,
live and touch them, even though you're not supposed to. So it's really truly become my guiding light is
oh,
sharks.
wow.
And so I surround myself with them every day. to remind me to own my ocean and just keep swimming. So,
Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much.
of course.
All right. And, and that's, I talk about confidence, and, confidence is really the byproduct of courage, and you owned your courage.
I did. That's a
And,
great way to look at it. Thank you.
All right. So it's time now for me to share my screen. For those just listening, you should have been taking notes all along to be able to get that great information down. But if you have not, go grab a paper and pencil, pen, whatever, and I'm going to give the website for Stevie Dawn. If you are listening, though, you can go to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, Vicki Noethling, or go to my findyourleadershipconfidence.com website. But for Stevie's website, it is empathix.net. That's EMPATHIX.net. On Facebook, you can find her by Stevie Dawn Carter. And in LinkedIn is Dr. Stevie Dawn Carter. And I'm going to turn it over to Stevie to talk to you about her website and what particular social media she loves you to join and visit.
Yeah, absolutely. So on our website, one of the things I would encourage you to look at is we have the Empathix Communicator course. It's an on-demand course that takes a deep dive into everything emotional intelligence, empathy, and communication at a very reasonable price, very accessible to everybody. So definitely check that out on the website. In terms of social media, I hang out on LinkedIn. That's where I am every day. So if you want to find me, that's the easiest way to find me. Shoot me a message. I would love to connect with you, maybe grab a virtual coffee and chat about all the things. So would love to connect on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, Stevie, it's been just a great time with you today. Wonderful conversation about emotional intelligence and empathy, and taking away some myths that might be there, but also encouraging people why you should add both those into your daily lives if you have not done so already.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the great conversation this morning.
Yes, awesome. As always, I remind everyone that life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.